Okay, excellent. Well, why don't we jump right into the presentation at this point. First, welcome everyone to the eSpecs for Revit webinar session. Again, my name is David Hood. Brief agenda of what we're going to be covering today, starting with a brief company overview of Interspec. Then we're going to jump right into the presentation, cover as much as we can within the next hour and 15 minutes, wrap up, talk about what questions have been posted, licensing and pricing, and also next steps. Also how to request any of our recorded presentations. We'll provide you with some more information at the end of this demonstration on how to do that. Well, let's get started. A little bit about Interspec before we jump into the presentation. Now, we were founded in 1998, headquartered here in Portland, Maine. We've been using eSpecs as an online spec writing service ever since 2000. And in 2004, we started support for AutoCAD and Revit-based applications. In 2006, ARCOM and Interspec worked together to integrate the industry standard AIA master spec libraries within the eSpecs product line. And that's what we're going to be using as a part of the demonstration today. We'll be using AIA master spec on the full-length 04 library as a part of the presentation. In 2009, we announced our BPM, or Building Product Manufacturers program, along with integration of the VA master, which we have available within eSpecs as well. In 2011, we announced our Owners program, along with integration of CMS and NMS documents for Canadian integrated specifications. And in 2012, we released eSpecs version 7. The demonstration will be using eSpecs version 7 this afternoon, which includes tighter BIM integration, Office Master updates, publishing improvements, and Navis Works integration. We will be doing a brief preview of the Navis Works integration at the end of the presentation today. And with that covered, why don't we jump right into the demonstration. So let me end the slideshow here and bring up eSpecs for Revit, which is a Windows-based application. A little bit about the interface here. On the left-hand side, you have the eSpecs workspace. And as we start inserting sections into the project manual, they will be located under the appropriate division on the left. On the right-hand side, in this gray area, is the eSpecs editor. And once we get some spec sections into the project manual, we'll actually show you some of these editing features along the way. Now, I've already gone through the process of starting a project manual here in eSpecs for Revit. Let me go under Tools and Settings, Project Information. Here I just gave this a basic project number and a project name, called it Falling Water. And I'm using, again, the Master Specs Full-Length 04 library. So I had done that just before starting the presentation, but did want to give you an idea for the library. I'm using the project name, which is Falling Water. And there are two main areas we want to focus on in the presentation. One obviously being the integration with Revit and specifications, but also how do you manually write project manuals if maybe you're not quite ready to integrate with Revit just yet, or I am integrating with the model, but at the same time, how do I manually insert sections that may not be a part of the model? So let's go through that process first, some of the manual processes here in eSpecs for Revit, because at any time under the Insert menu, you can manually insert a spec section at any time. What this does is it loads our base document list. Now this is looking in the eSpecs database, wherever you have that installed on your network, and it looks for, depending on your master spec subscription with ARCOM, or if you have an Office Master integrated like I have here for Interspec, will provide you with the database versions of your specification section. And so what I can do here is go under Division 10 Specialties as an example. Here we have a section or a few sections that maybe we want to pull in from the master into our project. Now I can do more though than just pick entire spec sections. What I can do is actually focus on this one section here, toilet, bath, and laundry accessories. But notice that I can expand the section and start making checklist choices based on the criteria I need for this particular project. So underneath submittals, if I need product data, product schedule, maintenance data, I make those choices. Now these checklist options are what we call mapped to various paragraphs, in this case within the master spec library. We can do the same for your Office Masters as well. So making one choice may turn on one paragraph, or it may turn on 5 or 10 paragraphs, depending on what you're selecting in the section. Now, anything that I leave unselected, such as samples, those related paragraphs will still be inserted into the project manual, but they'll be stricken out by default. And you'll get to see what that looks like here in just a few moments. As I dive down under Part 2 Products, maybe under Public Use Washroom Accessories, we'll select a grab bar. Underneath manufacturers, we'll come in and select a few manufacturers that we typically use here in the spec section. Now, once I've made all of my choices, I can do this for as many sections as I want to, not just this one, but if I had another 50 or 100 or more sections that I needed for this project manual, I could do it all manually using the checklist like I've just done. But ultimately, what we'll focus on a little bit later is how Revit can make these choices for you. Let's go right ahead and insert this toilet, bath, and laundry accessory spec section, which is now under Division 10 Specialties. I'll double click to load that section here on the right-hand side within the eSpecs editor. So here's the editor. A little bit about the spec section here. You can see the headers at the top, the footers obviously be at the bottom. We've got our blue text, which are comments and master specs, which will ultimately disappear in the section when we go to print or publish. Then we've got our language that we've selected using the checklist selections, and then we have some that are stricken out by default. So if we go back into the checklist for a moment and just do a quick comparison, remember when I was using the checklist, I was down in Part 2 products, had selected a grab bar. Well, that dictates that anything, not only in Part 2 products, but all related paragraphs, including those up in Part 1 general, be inserted based on that grab bar selection. So here you'll see I had selected public use washroom accessories. All the related paragraphs are inserted into the section. Anything I do not choose, like warm air dryers or custodial accessories, those paragraphs still inserted into the manual, but they're stricken out by default. So you can actually see what is being removed from the spec section, but ultimately when you go to print or publish, you can make all of that disappear if you'd like. Okay. Now, as you're thinking about editing, think about the checklist as a great option to quickly build these sections and do it as more of a one-to-many choice. Making one choice like that grab bar can turn on 10, 15 different paragraphs. However, if I want to do more one-to-one editing at a paragraph level, I can do that right here in the editor. I can jump in, add in any custom language that I want to, just like a Word document. If I see something that's stricken out, like childcare accessories, and I want to bring that back in, but I don't want it to affect anything else in the project manual, instead of using the checklist, which would select everything, I can bypass that by simply double-clicking with my mouse to bring that paragraph back in. And that doesn't affect anything else in that section. So I can come down, double-click to toggle paragraphs on, or remove them by double-clicking as well. And the color changes just have to do with our track changes functionality within the editor. Now, if you want to get an idea for what this section looks like without all the additional language, the blue comments, the strikeouts, we do have a final draft mode here in eSpecs. That will show you what this section looks like without all that additional language. So here's our public use washroom accessories, the custom language we typed in, but all the other options that we had stricken out and all the comments no longer appear. And ultimately, this may be what you end up printing or publishing within the eSpecs for Revit. Let's go back into edit mode here. Some things that you can manage globally for the project, things like headers and footers. Right? So if I wanted to go into the format menu here and load the header and footer dialog, maybe I just want to change some of the basic headers for this project, not just for the section, the entire project manual. So here where it says eSpecs, I'm going to change that. This is actually a master spec section. And right now I'm using a merge field for the project name. I don't want to use that. Maybe I paste in an image, or let's grab in a different merge field. Let's pick the section, we'll do maybe the section version number. Okay, so we've just changed that to master spec and to pull in the section version number for the section, and I'm going to come down and click on OK. So it now applies those changes to the headers, again, not only for this section, but any section in this project manual. We can do similar things with styles, which we have found to be very popular with customers, where I'm working on a project manual. This is based on master spec, so it has that master spec look and feel. The comments are in blue, the font is a certain way, but I have a client that needs the sections to look and feel a different way. So what we can do is under the Format menu, load the Style Guide Manager. This allows you to store style guides that you typically use within the eSpecs database and reuse them from project to project. Now, the default style guide that I'm using is based on AI8 Master Spec. but you'll also notice I have a VA master style. Anybody that's done any work for the VA knows that their specification sections, they have certain content and look and feel to the documents as well. So let's go ahead and actually apply the VA master style and click on Close. Now what this is going to do with this section is apply that new style guide. Even though it's the same section, it looks completely different. Our comments are no longer blue. They're in black and justified to the right. Our parts and articles are in bold. We're using completely different fonts and font styles throughout the entire section. So it's still the same content. I can still go in and edit the specifications. It just now looks completely different. I have a set of sections that needs to look and have this particular style guide assigned. I can create that with an eSpecs and reuse it from project to project. And I can simply go back, reapply the default style guide, which in this case is master spec, and have that apply. Okay. And as you're editing these sections, if you do have a master spec subscription and you're using that within eSpecs, you also have access to the master spec supporting documents here at the top, which will launch a window within the editor, redirect to RCOM's website, look at the section that you currently have open, which in this case is toilet, bath, and laundry accessories, and go directly there for the supporting documents. So here, and again, this is with your master spec subscription. Here you have information on reference standards, drawing coordination information for that section. So a lot of great resources available to you, not only within the section, but the supporting documents as well. Let's exit out the supporting documents. As you're working within eSpecs, always remember you are in a database format. However, if you ever want to get out of the database for whatever reason, under the File menu, you can always do things like export a section. I can export this to an RTF document and then open that in Word. I can also export to a PDF file as well. I can export selected sections if I want to do more than one, maybe select an entire division. Export all sections as individual files, or the entire project manual. Give me one file, cover sheet, table of contents, all my sections with headers and footers and styles assigned, all in one document. And again, whether that's a PDF or an RTF file that you can open in Word. Now you can also do the reverse, which is I have a section, maybe it's a consultant section, and I want to bring that into eSpecs to make it a part of the project manual. I can also import sections here right about in the middle under the File menu. And let's go through and find a good example to use. Just bear with me one second. Here I have a sample in the master format 04, just a Word document. I'm going to bring that into the project manual. This is a section for maintenance of cast-in-place concrete, so it's not a part of our database necessarily. Maybe it was sent to us by a consultant, or maybe it's a section we have lying around that we had written in Word, and we want to include that in the project manual. So here now you'll see under Division 3, we have maintenance of cast-in-place concrete. I can double-click on that section. Load it on the right-hand side within the editor. Pulls in the headers and footers that you have assigned for the project, along with assigning the style guide that you currently have set. Now if we had the VA master style set, this section would look like the VA style that we had assigned earlier on. But I can do full editing just like a Word document. I also have the ability to come in and look at a paragraph like floor joint repair and remove that by double-clicking with my mouse, or double-click to bring it back in. Okay. Now all of these sections ultimately will land on the table of contents, which you can load here in the upper left-hand corner. So as sections are inserted into the project manual, table of contents automatically populates. Here's Division 3, maintenance of cast-in-place concrete. As I scroll down, Division 10, toilet, bath, and laundry accessories. So as we're inserting sections, whether it's manually or through the Revit integration, which we're going to cover here in just a moment, that table of contents will automatically populate for you. Another great feature within eSpecs for Revit, something that was asked of us by clients, is it's great that we have access to the specification sections, but we have additional files that we want to associate with this project manual, have it stored in the eSpecs database, so that as we have users, let's say we have 3 different folks in here editing this project manual for falling water, but they have additional project files that they want to share and keep in one location. Under the Insert menu, you can always attach project files to a specification project within eSpecs for Revit. Let's jump in, get some samples here to use. So maybe I pull in this certificate. Maybe I pull in this JPEG image along with this list of products and cut sheets. So a couple of JPEG images, a Word document, I could pull in a PDF file, a DWF file, whatever you want to attach, you can go ahead and click on Open. This is now going to take those files from your hard drive or network share, wherever they're located, and store them within the eSpecs database. Now, anybody working on this falling water project in the upper left will have access to those project files. I can click on something like that certificate. It finds it in the eSpecs database and pulls it up right here on your machine. You can not only view this, you could save it off on your hard drive if you needed to, but it's an easy way of being able to centralize and assign project files to a specification project like we've just done. Okay. Excellent. Well, that is just about everything I wanted to cover as it relates to the manual processes here, using the checklist to build specification sections, how the editor works, headers and footers, style guides, importing and exporting, the table of contents and project files. But now what I would like to do is kind of switch gears and start talking about the integration with Revit and how the Revit model can start doing a lot of this work for you. Instead of coming through and manually making these checklist choices, which is still very fast to do, let's allow the Revit model and the work we've done in Revit to build this for us. And so what we're going to do is jump into Revit Architecture 2012 and show you how this process works. Now, hopefully everybody is able to see the model of falling water on your screens. And there's a lot of great information in this model. And what we're going to do is find an example to use. Let's scroll in and maybe select this stair family here. Now, there's a lot of great information in this family. Let's jump into its properties for a moment. So we have construction information at the top, materials and finishes. What we're looking for as it relates to eSpecs and automating specifications, it starts with assembly codes and descriptions. Rule of thumb, if you have assemblies assigned in your Revit families, we can automate specifications. If you don't have assemblies assigned to your Revit families, eSpecs will skip over those families. Ultimately, what we're going to do is tie, or what we call bind, these assembly codes that are being assigned in your Revit models to the specification sections back in eSpecs for Revit. Now let's take a closer look at this assembly for steel stairs. You'll see the code and the description is right above it for steel stairs. But let's load the entire uniformat list. If you have Revit installed in your office, you have access to this list. So here we have a variety of assembly codes and descriptions. So you're simply going to come in and make sure that they're assigned and assigned correctly. So here we have steel stairs. Well, what eSpecs is going to do is scan through the model, see that you have that steel stair assembly assigned, and automate a host of specification sections, maybe metal stairs, pipe and tube railings, metal fabrications, whatever we deem necessary for that assembly. Now, if I was to change that assembly to wood stairs, we would be bringing in still spec sections, but an entirely different group of spec sections. We would no longer need the metal stair spec section if we only had wood stairs in the model. So eSpecs is looking for that assembly code and description to ultimately automate your specifications. Okay. Now, in some cases, the assembly isn't enough. This may automate, let's say, the metal stair spec section, but that assembly isn't quite enough to tell me things like the material, let's say the tread material on that stair, right? And so what we can do is once the assembly is assigned, we can then bind to additional parameters here in the Revit families, things like a keynote field or a type comments field, or if I scroll up a little bit more, the tread material, which in this case is concrete. So what eSpecs can do is say, okay, not only do I need that metal stair section, but based on this additional parameter in the family, let's make sure that we have concrete stair treads assigned in the specification section. All right, now let's go into eSpecs for Revit for a moment, and I want to show you how this is set up in the background. How are we binding an assembly code like steel stairs to spec sections, but also how are we binding something like a concrete tread to further our automation? That is all done back within eSpecs for Revit. So what we're going to do go back into that application and load what we call the eSpecs Binding Manager. This is the administrative tool that we use to ultimately bind or link everything together. In the upper left-hand corner, you have a listing of assembly codes and descriptions. Here's the one for the steel stair assembly. Now on the right-hand side, what you have are a listing of all of your masters, depending on if you're using an office master, like I have here for Interspec. You'll notice I have the VA master installed, which we have integrated within eSpecs, along with the master spec libraries. So based on that one assembly, what we're telling the system to do is every time you see that assembly for this project type, bring in, under Division 5 metals, the metal stair and pipe and tube railing spec sections. But don't just bring in the entire sections. Let's go down, as we would in metal stairs here, to the checklist level. Let's make sure that this is a pre-assembled steel stair and not some of these other options. So what you can do is actually bind not only to the section level, but down to the paragraph level as well. So this is a good example of a binding from the steel stair assembly on the left to the metal stair or pre-assembled steel stairs within that metal stair specification section. However, remember we mentioned that that assembly may not be enough to determine a tread material to use. Right? That's good to automate metal stairs down to pre-assembled steel stairs, but nowhere really does it say in the assembly what tread material we're using. That is where we can use some of these parameters in the lower left-hand corner. It looks at the family. It'll look at something like the tread material and say, well, what do you have for tread materials assigned in your model? Remember that we had this concrete tread assigned in that family we were looking at. So what that's going to do is it's going to dive down into that metal stair section underneath pre-assembled steel stairs and make sure that concrete-filled tread is selected in the spec section. Now, if I was to change or add in new tread materials, if this was, let's say, epoxy stair tread, that would select the epoxy tread in the specification section. So as you're making changes and modifications to the model, it is updating your specification sections along the way. And that is really the binding process in a nutshell. We spend quite a bit of time going through this binding process, especially during eSpecs training sessions, but did want to give you an overview so you understood, okay, where are these spec sections coming from? How are they driven from eSpecs? And it starts here in eSpecs Binding Manager. But right now, let's jump out of the Binding Manager for a moment. Currently, in eSpecs for Revit, we don't know what is in the model. We have these two sections here that we manually inserted, but right now eSpecs for Revit doesn't know what is in that falling water project. So what we're going to do is go back into Revit, and you'll notice at the top under the Add-ins tab that we have this eSpecs plugin installed. This allows us to communicate the Revit data that we have with the specification content that we're working on in eSpecs. The first option is to update our specifications. Let's go ahead and click on that. The first thing we need to do is to point to the specification project that we're working on, which in this case is falling water. The next screen will be a filter. Basically, what exactly do you want to communicate with your specifications? So here it provides all these categories. Do I want to export information under architecture, MEP, and structure? And since this is mainly an architecture model that we're looking at, we're going to choose all architecture categories. Is there Revit phasing that we have to take into consideration, or do we just want to include all phases of the model? Are there linked Revit models that are associated that we wish to export and communicate with the specs as well? In this case, not right now, so I'll leave that unselected. And additional parameters. Remember, it starts with the assembly codes and descriptions, but you can also bind to those additional parameters, like the stair tread. Do I want to include things like that stair tread in my automation? Yes, I do, so I'll leave that selected. So I'll come down and click on OK. So it's now gathering from the model all the assembly data, all the additional parameters, and exporting that over to the eSpecs database, again, wherever you have that installed on your network. Now, back within eSpecs for Revit, I can refresh my project manual. It will give me this dialog showing me all the specification sections that are coming from the model and look for any discrepancies as well. So as I scroll down here, here's my metal stair spec section. It's coming in from master spec full length 04. Its origin is that this is a binding. Its BIM status is that this is a new section. And the refresh action, meaning when I click on OK, what is going to happen? It's going to add that section into the project manual. Now again, it's also looking for discrepancies. So here at the top, notice toilet, bath, and laundry accessories. We have that section in our project manual, but notice it's a different color. It flags it to let you know. You have a section in your manual right now that doesn't match up with the model currently. It came from master spec full length. Its origin is that it was manually inserted, but its BIM status is that this section is not called for. Nowhere in that falling water model do we have anything associated with toilet, bath, and laundry accessories, that spec section, so it flags it for you. So it allows you to remove the section if you want, but in this case, we're going to not bother removing it. We'll keep this section. We'll come down and click on OK. That's going to start now populating all of the spec sections that are associated with that falling water model. But not only the entire sections, it will go down to the checklist level. So we'll give this a moment to load. There we go. And now on the left-hand side, as I expand the divisions, look at all of these spec sections that are now available in eSpecs for Revit. The majority of these have come from that falling water project. The information I have placed in my model is bringing in the data and intelligence here in my spec sections. I can find any of these sections, like under Division 5 Metals. Here's the metal stair section. I can double-click and load that on the right-hand side in the editor. And all the same editing capabilities we talked about before, adding in language, double-clicking, using the checklist, all of that still applies even though the section came from the Revit model. Okay, so keep that in mind. I still have full editing capabilities. Headers and footers, style guides would be assigned as well. Right? That header change that I made to name it master spec in the section version number, notice that applies to this section as well. But as you're taking a look at this section, here's our pre-assembled steel stairs with concrete-filled treads. We did not have precast, epoxy, or formed metal in the model. Therefore, those options come in as stricken out text. Now, the common question is, great, we have the section. What happens if something changes in the model? What happens if we add in a new tread material instead of just having one, which is concrete? So let's go through that process. Let's go back into the model. Let's jump into the properties of this family. Here's the tread material, which is concrete. Well, let's go ahead and change that. So here what we're going to do is assign this as epoxy stair tread. And go ahead and save that. Now, not only do I have epoxy stair tread, though, that's just for that family. I still have concrete treads for some of these other stair families, like this one here, this one in the background as well. But now that we've made some modifications, we're going to update our specifications again. Go ahead and export all of this information. There we go. Go back into eSpecs for Revit. Refresh our project manual again. And let's go ahead and find that metal stair section and reload that in our editor. So here we have that metal stair section with pre-assembled steel stairs, but now we have two tread materials, remember. We have concrete filled, but we also had that family with epoxy resin filled treads. So as you're updating the model, it's updating your specifications as well. Okay. Now that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg as it relates to this automation. There are a lot of additional Revit plugin functionality that we haven't gone through, and I'd like to demonstrate some of that now. So let's go back into Revit and talk about, really we've only focused on this update eSpecs specifications button, but we have all these other things that we can do. So let's talk a little bit about those now. I can do things like view and mark up sections directly in Revit. So let's say I'm modeling in Revit. I don't necessarily have access to the full eSpecs application because I don't edit specifications, so my firm doesn't give me a copy. But I do have this plugin installed. So what I can do is I can select a family, such as that stair family, and then click on the View eSpecs Sections option at the top. And what this will do is pull from the eSpecs database a digital copy of the spec sections that are related to that stair family, including the metal stair spec section. Now, not only can I view the section in Revit, I can also do red lines and markups. So as I'm reviewing the section, here's pre-assembled steel stairs with concrete, epoxy. Well, you know what, maybe I made a mistake. I didn't mean to change that to epoxy stair treads. Let's go ahead and strike that out. And maybe some of the other paragraphs that are associated with it. Brings in track changes. It was deleted by Revit user myself at this date and time. This is just to a digital copy. When I save this, it would send a copy back to the specifier. They would then get a side-by-side comparison of the section they're working on, that metal stair section, next to this document that I've edited. And then they can then decide, do I want to remove these epoxy stair treads, yes or no, and make the necessary changes in the actual section. So not only can I view these copies, I can do red lines and markups directly in the model. Another feature that you have, remember earlier we were talking about project files, how we could attach, and I think we had a couple of JPEG images and a Word document. You can also access those here in Revit, even if you don't have the eSpecs for Revit application installed. You can use the plugin to click on View eSpecs Project Files. And so it's pulling the project files I had saved earlier. Maybe I was on a completely different machine, a different user, using eSpecs for Revit. I can access that information as well here in my model. So if I wanted to click on something like falling water stair JPEG image, click on View File. That pulls it from the eSpecs database and loads it locally here on my machine so I can view those project files. And again, whether that's a JPEG image, a PDF file, a TWIF file, whatever you want to attach in the eSpecs database, you can absolutely do from within eSpecs for Revit. Some reports that you can run under the reporting option here at the top. One is the table of contents report. Now this is great for Revit users. I'm modeling in Revit, right? I've got this falling water project, but I don't necessarily have access to, again, eSpecs for Revit because I'm maybe not in charge of writing the project manual. I don't need to edit specs, so I don't need this application on my machine. But I still want to get a sense for, based on what I've modeled here in Revit, what spec sections are the eSpecs for Revit users going to see based on my work in Revit. So you can run this TOC report. And what this will do is break down for you the specification sections that are associated with this model that you're working on. Give this a second to load here. So here under Division 5 Metals, you have a few different sections. You've got metal fabrications, metal stairs, pipe and tube railings. So even though I don't have access to the core eSpecs for Revit, because I'm a Revit user, I don't edit the specifications, I can still run these reports to get an idea for, based on my model, this is what the specification manual will generally look like. Okay? I can take it a step further, though, and run the binding summary report, which not only lists the specification sections, it goes down to the product and material level. So I'll show you what that looks like here. So now what we have is a listing of all the sections. Here we have, let's see, metal stairs. You can see all the required submittals based on that specification section under Part 2 products. You can see that this is a pre-assembled steel stair with concrete-filled treads, and, well, you know what, there's an epoxy resin-filled tread. So not only can you view this, you can also, it's a good way of checking your work. Well, you know what, I don't want epoxy resin-filled tread in the specification. Somewhere in the model I may have assigned the wrong tread material. So you can go back in, change that back to concrete-filled tread. So it's a way of also checking your work, but also get a snapshot or an outline specification of what is going on in the project manual. And the last report that you can run is the model validation console. I'll go right ahead and run that now. Now, the model validation console is going to be a report that shows you all of your families that you currently have in the model. Okay, now let's go ahead and shorten this up a little bit. Let's take a look at some of these stair families. So here you'll see the family. Here's the family type, the assembly code assigned, the description that comes along with it, along with the spec section that's associated. So we have that steel stair assembly that's bringing in the metal stair specification section. It's also bringing in pipe and tube railings. Now you'll notice I have multiple stair families, all bringing in metal stairs. We're only going to bring in that metal stair section once, but we will edit the metal stair section so that it has the criteria for all of the different stair families that are associated with it. Now, not only can I view those relationships, I can actually come in and I can change assembly codes and descriptions right from the report. So if I wanted this to be a wood stair, I could select it, click on OK. It would actually write that information back to the family in your model. So you can view the information. You can also change it here in the report as well. Or if I had something I wanted to view, like the metal stair spec section, I can double click on it right from the report, and it will load it, again, directly within Revit for me. As I scroll up a little bit here. Now, not only are you looking for things that you are automating, you also want to look for any information that you might be missing as well. What do I have in this report that might be missing here on the right-hand side? Notice how some of these do not have specification sections. So we want to figure out why. Now, why do I have information in the model, but I don't have a spec section associated with it? So here's an example where I may have a family that simply does not have an assembly code and description assigned. Remember, if we don't have an assembly, we can't automate specifications. This report will show us that if we're missing anything. And if I wanted to assign the assembly, the correct one, I could do it right here from the report. Now, there are other examples where I have a family that does have an assembly, but it still doesn't have a spec section. And why? So why would I have an assembly but no section still? That simply means we don't have a binding created back within eSpecs for Revit, within the binding manager, to that planting assembly code and description. And in this case, it's probably on purpose. If I'm using this assembly, it's fine that it's in the model, but I don't need a spec section for that assembly, so we'll simply not create a binding for it. So this is a great report to run, especially after your first few projects, to see, okay, what am I missing in my models in terms of this automation process? A lot of folks will load up a model, maybe it's from a previous project or one that you're working on, run this report right away. See what you're missing for assemblies, what you're missing for bindings, and it'll give you a great idea for what work you may have to do, not only in your models, but maybe in your binding manager and eSpecs as well. Okay, and that is just about everything that I wanted to cover as it relates to the plugin. I did want to make a quick note. You will see there is the ability to assign eSpecs keynotes. We do have automated keynotes that drive from the specification section and the content, which will load a keynote list that you can then apply in Revit. That demonstration piece, though, we've broken out into a separate demo, and we have that available for download. So anybody that's interested in seeing more about how we can automate and assign keynotes from specification sections, let us know offline, and I'll provide you with an email address where you can request a recorded demonstration for not only for keynoting, but for any of our presentations. We don't tie it into the eSpecs for Revit demo because the keynoting in itself is roughly a 30 to 45-minute demonstration just for the keynoting piece. So we've broken that out into its own separate presentation, but that is a free download if you'd like to see how that process works. Okay. But back within eSpecs for Revit, it's all about putting together the project manual. We've used a mix of manual creation using the checklist and importing a section, and then we've done largely integration with Revit. Let the Revit model and the data we already have in it automate these specification sections for us. All right, excellent. Now that we've covered the automation between Revit and eSpecs, it looks like we have a little bit of time left. So what I would like to do is talk a little bit about eSpecs for Navis Works. For any firm that is using Navis Works, internally, I want to show you what we're doing within eSpec's Navis Works plugin. So here's a Navis Works file of this falling water project that we're working on. And similar to our plugin within Revit, we can also provide similar functionality within Navis Works as well. So here's the model for falling water. On the left-hand side, now there's a couple of different ways of viewing data. You can use the ribbon at the top, or you can use the menu picks on the left-hand side, the eSpecs tree. So as I expand something like project files, you can actually access the information that you're working on within eSpecs for Revit and Autodesk Revit that can then transition to Navis Works as well. I can do something like click on or double-click on that falling water stair JPEG image from the Navis Works plugin, load that locally here on my machine. I can get access to the specification sections as well within Navis Works. I can find a section like metal stairs, and let's click on View Section Markup. So here's the metal stair specification section, again loaded directly in Navis Works. And I can view project materials. So if I were to take a look at one of my assemblies, let's say for steel stairs, you'll notice as I'm selecting these, it's also highlighting them in the Navis Works project as well. So as I select steel stairs, it makes that choice for me so I can visually see what I'm selecting. But here are the sections that are associated, metal stairs and pipe and tube railings. If I select metal stairs, you'll see I have pre-assembled steel stairs with concrete and epoxy resin-filled treads. So that specification data I can also populate within Navis Works as well. And I just wanted to do a brief preview of the eSpecs for Navis Works application. Again, for anybody that is using Navis Works, it's a great addition. It does require that you have the eSpecs for Revit application, but it's another great addition to be able to synchronize all of this data regardless of the Autodesk product that you're using, because we also support Autodesk AutoCAD in addition to Revit and Navis Works. All right, excellent. Well, that is everything that I wanted to cover in this demonstration this afternoon. What I'd like to do now is switch gears, jump into PowerPoint, start talking about the licensing and the pricing, see if we can take some questions, and then wrap up providing with an email address where you can request any of our recorded demonstrations, or if you'd like to contact us offline with some specific questions, we can definitely work with you one-on-one there. But let's cover how the licensing and the pricing of eSpecs for Revit, the Revit plugin, and Navis Works, how all of that breaks down. So let me grab my highlighter here. Now, don't feel as though you have to write any of this information down. We have PDF copies that we can email to you. And again, I'll provide an email address on the next screen where you can request that information. But we do licensing in two formats, a perpetual license and a term-based license. Now the perpetual licensing, let's focus on that. That is the more popular option that we find. Here is eSpecs for Revit, which is $2,795 per license. Now that is a floating network license, meaning you can install eSpecs for Revit on as many machines as you want. We just look at concurrent use. If you need two people at the same time in eSpecs for Revit editing specifications, you need two copies at $27.95 a piece. The eSpecs for Revit maintenance contract is $420 per license per year. That covers things like software updates, technical support, and so that covers your software license, $420 per license per year. The eSpecs Revit plugin consoles, and again, these are the plugins we install on your Autodesk Revit machines. These are $295 a piece, and those are on a per-seat basis and not a floating basis. Okay, so keep that in mind as you're thinking about the licensing options. And then you can see the eSpecs Revit plugin maintenance, $45 per plugin per year. And typically with various promotions that we're running, we typically include a number of plugins with every eSpecs for Revit license to get you started, but you can always contact us about the various promotions that we might be running at any given time. Again, I know through the end of this quarter we're including 2 additional plugins with every eSpecs for Revit license that you purchase. So that may be a great starting point to give you some free Revit plugins right off the bat. And here is the eSpecs Navis Works plugin console. Again, for Navis Works users, you can see these are $495 per plugin. on a perpetual license, and those are per seat. And it does require that you have e-specs for Revit. And then the plug-in maintenance, $75 per plug-in per year. Okay. And again, we also have term-based licensing. If you don't want to purchase the software outright, even though that's the most popular option, we do have term-based licensing or yearly subscriptions as well. You can do e-specs for Revit, $1,295 per license per year. Here are the Revit plugin console, $135 per seat per year. And then the Navis Works plugin, $225 per seat per year. And we have various training options also available. This seems to be a common question. You know, what do you offer for training? We have everything from these self-paced training videos, which are $400 a piece. So if you wanted to get up to speed, just to kind of get kick-started on how to use e-specs for Revit, we would recommend purchasing the Basics class at $400 and the Revit Integration class at $400. E-specs Designer, separate application used for managing Office Masters. Anybody that is managing an Office Master, I definitely recommend taking a look at the Designer presentation that we have when you get a chance. It talks a lot about how we manage Office Masters within this e-specs environment, things like doing Office Master updates and how those are handled. And so there's a lot of great information in that Designer application and presentation for anybody managing an Office Master. But back to the training here, we have self-paced training videos. We also have live training classes, and we can do these on-site or webcast. And these are $1,000 per class and last roughly 3 hours in length. So we have the e-specs Basics course, which is one-on-one with an instructor. We have the Revit Integration course. We have hands-on training for anybody that, in addition to doing the typical picks and clicks of the Basics class, I now want to take maybe half a day and actually have you walk through the process. Let's create some headers and footers and get those set up for us, and style guides and things of that nature. And we have a class for e-specs Designer as well. But we also have integration services, things like the Revit Pilot Integration Program. This is where we take 2 to 3 days. And as we were looking at that integration process earlier, remember the binding manager when we were setting up relationships between assemblies and spec sections. Well, maybe you don't want to take the time to do some of that work on your own. You want to have us at Interspec do that. It's a very popular program where firms that are rolling out e-specs or Revit have said, here is a Revit model that we've done for healthcare facility. Here is the specification manual we wrote for that healthcare facility. Basically, Interspec, what we want you to do is to learn our preferences and build our bindings for us. The out-of-the-box bindings are great to get us started with the automation with Revit, but based on that steel stair assembly, we want the spec section to be built this way. And so firms are sending us a model, they're sending us their specification sections for that model, and we are learning their preferences and writing those within the binding manager for you. And so that takes anywhere from 2 to 3 days, depending on the size of the project, and you can contact us offline, and we can really determine, is it a 2-day project, or are we looking at a 3-day process for creating those bindings for you. Office Master integration, if you have an Office Master and you'd like us to look at integrating that and providing that as a service within e-specs, maybe because you don't use Master Spec, or maybe you do, but you've taken Master Spec and it's really a hybrid, or you've removed a lot of language that you typically don't use. You've added in a lot of your own customizations to Master Spec. And you don't want to start over, you simply want to take your master and include that within e-specs, create checklist selections so that turn on paragraphs. We can absolutely do that with your Office Masters as well. If you send us some sample sections, we can give you an idea for the cost associated with doing that. And also we have the VA Master. Anybody that's doing any work for the VA, subscription is $1,995. And we have quite a few customers that are licensing e-specs for Revit. They're using it with Master Spec, and they also have the VA Master that they've licensed also available for any VA work that you might be doing. And again, we also have other libraries that we support, like the CMS and NMS Canadian Masters. So a variety of different documents. We're not just working with one library. We have all the Master Spec libraries, the VA Master, CMS and NMS, and we can support any Office Master as well. But as we wrap up, I did want to make just a couple of quick notes. Anybody that needs either the pricing information or any of our recorded presentations, simply send us an email to sales@e-specs.com. We can provide you with PDF pricing information, also the recorded demos that we have, e-specs for Revit, e-specs for Navis Works, e-specs for AutoCAD, and again, e-specs Designer, how you manage an office master within this entire environment is covered in the Designer application. Feel free just to send us off an email offline, and we can definitely provide any of those to you. And again, those demonstrations, they are free to download. E-specs for Revit is roughly an hour long. Designer is probably close to 30, 45 minutes in that range. Okay. Well, at this point, I'm going to pause just for a few minutes. Let's see if we can take a few questions before we wrap up. And I will keep this slide up and running for the next minute or two as we go through these questions.